Hello, and welcome to the Industry Week Book Club. I'm Laura Poutre, Senior Editor, Industry Week. Today I'm talking with Christian Schuh, co-author of the new book, Profit from the Source, Transforming Your Business by Putting Suppliers at the Core. Christian is Managing Director and Senior Partner at the Boston Consulting Group's Vienna practice. Welcome, Christian.
Hi, hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Your book focuses on a rather unloved part of most businesses, procurement, and it talks about how leading edge businesses are taking a different tack, putting procurement at the center of their business and giving the heads of this particular department a real seat at the leadership table. And you start the book by going into some history. And I'm wondering if you could talk about just to start off, how did procurement become the afterthought of strategic planning? And has it always been this way?
Well, Laura, I think it has always been this way. And I think we have here an educational reason and a cultural reason. So if you think about the CEOs of today's companies, most of them have gone through business school. And in business school, they have read marketing, sales, finance. And so they have picked career in these disciplines, right? So they have made it up the ranks through these disciplines, and they've never really experienced procurement in their careers. And the cultural reason, I mean, if you think about novels or movies, right? The Wolf of Wall Street or something like that, right? Again, you see finance people, you see marketing people, but you never see procurement people, right? That also doesn't help. So I think this is probably the reason why it's a little bit neglected or has been neglected.
And then if we fast forward to today, what's changing to put procurement front and center?
Well, I think the supply chain crises of the past 2-3 years have been a wake-up call to a lot of companies. I mean, let's talk about the automotive industry, right? So this industry in 2021 has lost 10 million cars due to a lack of semiconductors. And CEOs have found themselves begging for parts to companies they didn't know, right? So they had no idea which semiconductors they were using in their cars. They had no idea who made these semiconductors, and they had zero relationship to the companies making these semiconductors. So I think this has been a very important wake-up call to in the companies across all industries.
And you talk about some companies that have been doing it right, like particularly Apple, you mentioned. What are they doing differently?
Well, Apple is historically. Let me start differently, right? So to us, right, to consumers, Apple is a company that churns out one cool product after another, and this could best be described as a marketing company. But in the tech industry, Apple is first and foremost known as a supply chain company, and maybe the supply chain company. So when in other industries, when engineers design a product, they focus on the product, and then they let the supplier worry about how to make it. In Apple, the engineer holistically thinks about the product and the process needed to make this product, right? And then Apple operations people hone these processes, and once they believe that the processes are good, then they roll out these processes at suppliers like Foxconn. And there always are a lot of Apple people on site to supervise what the supplier is doing. So there's this very intimate relationship between Apple and its suppliers. So the suppliers are never left alone.
So can you talk a little bit about, why companies need to change their relationships with suppliers to maybe be more like Apple, and how do these relationships need to change?
Yeah, I mean, CEOs spend. I stumbled over research from Harvard Business School, and it said that relatively recent, so from 2018, before the current crisis, and it said that CEOs on average spend 1% of their time uh, thinking about or working with suppliers. So this is 7 minutes per day. Right? But an average company probably spends 50%, half or more of the budget on suppliers. So with this 1%, so this means that CEOs in effect ignore half of their budget, right, from a cost perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As I outlined before, suppliers are the ones who make your supply chain work or not. So they are essential for your ability to ship products to customers. These customers are now more and more concerned about the carbon footprint associated with a product. So, the CEOs have made all these lofty promises about going carbon neutral. So it will be interesting how to achieve this without really engaging with suppliers. But in Laura, in the sports analogy, I've now been very much talking about defense, right? So preventing bad things from happening. But there's also the offense aspect of this. So suppliers hold an enormous wealth of innovation, right? So especially nowadays, again, if we talk about electronics, so every product you buy nowadays has some electronics inside. But most companies don't have the competence of really applying this electronics in the right way. So the difference between successful products and not so successful products in the future will very much depend on the ability of a company to harness the innovation coming in from suppliers. So many reasons to put suppliers at the core of a business.
I would imagine it's like a fine line, because you want to demand more. Like, just from reading the book, you're asking more of your suppliers, but you also want to have a better relationship with them.
Yeah.
How do you walk that line and strengthen your partnerships?
Mm-hmm. Right now, most companies treat all suppliers equal. Small, irrelevant suppliers, big, super important suppliers, all have to go through the same processes, all are going through the same transactional approach. So what we are recommending in the book is differentiate among your suppliers. So identify those who are really super important. So these are obviously suppliers who do a lot of business with you today. So treat those differently. But this is only part of the answer. So again, if you think about the automotive industry, car makers, a lot of the suppliers who are important today will provide components for internal combustion engines, right? But we all know the future will be batteries, right? So you also need to include in this super important suppliers who will be very important in the future. So the battery suppliers and electric motors and so on, right? And then our recommendation is build very strong, very long-lasting relationships with these suppliers that truly matter, and become even more transactional with all the other suppliers. So instead of doing the same for everyone, have very differentiated way of working with suppliers. And I think then, and we know we have seen this at companies who followed this advice, this is possible. So you kind of focus your effort on those few suppliers that matter.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and talking with us today. We're at the tail end of our time here. Thanks so much, and all the best to you, Christian.
Thank you,
And
Laura.
just a reminder, the book is called Profit from the Source, and it's out now.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me.